The violent and bloody civil war in Syria shows no sign of abating. Yet even as the bombs and bullets are being fired, the public are becoming increasingly confused by apparently strange alliances being formed, not with Syrian embassies such as this one in Britain, but between the militants fighting in Syria and other countries. On the 18th of February 2014, the Israeli Prime Minister is reported to have visited a secret medical facility in the Golan Heights, which was tending the injuries to militants from the Syrian conflict. An Israeli commander has admitted that the Israeli military is in contact with militants active in the civil war, who provide medical information about wounded militants. It is claimed that many hundreds have then been treated. So what's going on? What do the public think of the militants fighting in Syria? Are they aware of the relationship between those militants and Israel? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. And we began by inviting the public to share their perspective on those militants fighting in that civil war. What do you know of the militants fighting against the Syrian government?
To be honest, I'm not very clued up on what's happening in Syria at the moment. I'm aware that it's having a big impact on things that are happening to do with immigration in this country. But to do with actually the political situation in the interior, I'm not really very clued up about it at all.
I don't have direct intelligence that I can just tell you from what I've seen from the news. But there's certain Islamist groups, what you consider Islamist, the rebels, the army, and also now the Islamist groups are fighting each other.
Not a huge deal, apart from they seem to be supported by the UK.
I've heard various accounts of, obviously, their activities, and that some of them indeed may be associated with al-Qaeda, whereas others certainly have a legitimate fight with the present government.
So what do we know about the militants fighting in Syria? We turn to our expert guides for information.
I think it took a long time for people to realise who the fighters were. Essentially, the initial idea was that these were anti-government protesters, peaceful protesters, who were opposed to Bashar al-Assad's rule. Now, that was sold as a sort of a legitimate uprising within Syria. But of course, gradually, and the idea, a lot of these militants, or a lot of these protesters, were essentially trying to get the West on board. Now, in order to do that, they started resorting to criminal activities and committing acts in order to attract the sympathy of Western nations and have a sort of Libyan-style NATO intervention and a regime change operation in Syria. So by doing that, gradually but surely, going down the route of committing crimes, a lot of the journalists locally started realizing that the issue wasn't about peaceful protesters opposing an evil tyrant, but rather dangerous and criminal activity was going on within the movement. And one of the first signs was one of a Channel 4 journalist who'd been sent by the so-called rebels in an area to be shot at in order to sort of get what he said was a gringo journalist killed would get the Westerners on board. So that was a sort of a gradual shift in opinion.
Well, we are told that it's al-Qaeda that's fighting the Syrian government, but then we have to ask, what is al-Qaeda? Yeah? Al-Qaeda is a organization that was created, as Sir Robin Cook said, that it's an organization. It's not an organization, it's a group. It's a database of ex-Mujahideen. CIA, Mossad have been using the term al-Qaeda, and they have used mercenaries, ex-jihadists, murderers, killers released from prisons from Saudi Arabia, sent to fight on behalf of Saudi Arabia and Israel against the Syrian government. And what's so sad is the fact that, you know, you've got these so-called Muslim groups who are going off to join these, the battle against Assad, when really the battle is not, the battle is for Israel. They're fighting for Israel, because it's, who's going to benefit from that attack or deposing of Assad? Who's going to benefit? It's going to be Israel.
Next, we invited the public to comment on videos uploaded by militants in Syria showing torture and mutilation. Now, in the past, there hasn't been very high recognition of those videos. Has anything changed?
Obviously, on one hand, we are all human beings and anybody's going to be opposed to violence. I'm not sure, but there is a reason why people upload things. I don't know, calling the UN.
I haven't seen too much of it myself now personally, but what I have heard is pretty brutal stuff, reminiscent of what happened in Iraq with kind of screwdrivers pushing people's heads and some really vicious, horrible stuff. So if it is true that is what's happening, then it's appalling stuff, you know.
How do you feel about videos which have been uploaded by militants in Syria showing acts of torture and mutilation?
I think violence in the media is quite a dangerous game, and I try to avoid consuming it personally. I think it's hard to make distinctions between violence for entertainment and violence for the perpetuation of important news stories, and I'm very cautious about consuming violent images.
Well, I had heard something about that, and that is obviously pretty horrendous. I know we all have a right to free assembly to a certain extent, but that is bordering on, obviously it is inhumane, so I can't quite see, well, I know why they've done it, but what are they set to achieve? God knows, apart from trying to instill fear and hatred in people, but I mean, it won't work, so, but very strange idea, but there you go.
We turn to our experts to understand what we can learn from these pieces of footage.
The organ chomping incident was seen by many, many people, and I think it very much changed the dynamic and the understanding of the Syrian conflict. It was initially seen as sort of peaceful protesters opposing Bashar's rule. But of course, that incident, which was seminal really within the conflict, actually showed the true nature of who these people were. So that was a major element. Since then, we've seen thousands of footage on YouTube uploaded to sort of show the glorious jihad, and the images are absolutely harrowing. I mean, just a few days ago, we had a group of Chechen rebels who actually rounded up elderly villagers, young men, even children, in what appears to be actually a mosque or something similar. It's not very clear. And then they end up shooting the whole group dead. So these kind of images are incredibly shocking. Of course, it has to be said that it's very difficult to establish the real ones from the fake ones. But when you go back to the organ chomping one, that one was absolutely authentic, and the man who did it really took pride in doing it. And so a lot of them are not only uploaded for propaganda purposes, but are very much recognized, and there is great pride within the al-Qaeda group of what these actions, what these people are doing.
I don't go out my way to look for stuff like that. It makes me sick, and from what the few that I have seen, it's awful. And also, you've got prominent journalists who have documented what's been happening, who have been witnesses to what's been happening, and so you read about it. So I'd rather read than see those horrific things that they are putting out.
Next, we asked the public how attacks by militants connected with al-Qaeda in places such as Pakistan, Syria and Iraq have affected their perception of the general situation. Here's what they said. How do the attacks by militants linked with al-Qaeda in Pakistan, Syria and Iraq affect your views of the overall situation?
I think that definitely they do color my views on the current situation. I mean, you know, you hear a lot of claims that they're fighting for justice and for oppressive regimes, but then you see killing and torture and, you know, fighting in the name of, under the banner of Islam, and that's very tarnishing to the religion and also to humanity. I mean, I think that's how it shapes my views.
There have been attacks by militants linked with al-Qaeda in Pakistan, in Iraq and Syria. How does that affect your view of the situation?
I think it really shows that it's a complete double standard on the part of the West, because, you know, apparently when we started fighting the war on terror, it's against al-Qaeda, and al-Qaeda is going to come and, you know, like invade our homes, and now suddenly al-Qaeda is almost like like an ally now, and we're using them as a means of destabilizing a country. And that should be a wake-up call for people, because it's like suddenly, I mean, the roles always switch. It's like when somebody's favorable to you, you'll use them, and when they're not, you'll dispose of them. just like with Saddam Hussein and with other leaders. And now like the same thing is happening here, where you see, oh, okay, you know, they'll utilize al-Qaeda now because it's favorable to them. But when it was favorable to use them as a means of, you know, justifying a war on terror, then that was a different situation. So, I mean, I think it just really shows how much of a game this really is, and that people really need to wake up and not see this as such a polarized issue, I think.
We invited our expert commentators to share their perspective on the situational implications of the attacks in Syria, Iraq and Pakistan by al-Qaeda-related militants.
The issue of al-Qaeda in Israel is a fascinating one because, as we've seen, I mean, one of the major aims, if you want, of al-Qaeda was to fight the great Satan empire and the great Zionist entity. But actually, as we have seen, they have never attacked Israel. And essentially, the bulk of al-Qaeda's victims are Muslims. From North Africa, which is Acme, al-Qaeda and the Maghreb, to what we're seeing today in Syria, and then further afield in Iraq. All the victims are fellow Muslims to al-Qaeda members. So there is a question mark today of why no attack on Israel? Here is the enemy very nearby. You are heavily armed. You have always stated that Israel was your enemy, and yet the bulk of their, well, essentially all their targets are Muslim. It does beg the question, what is the rapport between al-Qaeda and Israel? And if actually there is a connection between these two entities.
Well, al-Qaeda is a tool of Israel and the CIA, and so why would it attack Israel? Yeah? Al-Qaeda is following the agenda of Israel. For example, in Pakistan, the worst atrocities that have been taking place in Pakistan, because Israel is very interested, is very concerned about what's happening in Pakistan, because Pakistan is right next to Iran, which is Israel's agenda. For example, we had the Raymond Davis case. Raymond Davis, who basically was caught killing Pakistani officials in the streets of Pakistan. He was a CIA operative, and he was pursuing the policy of Israel and the CIA, which is the Dragon policy, which is to create sectarian warfare and to create chaos in the country. And he was caught. When the Pakistani police caught him, they found that he was a CIA operative, and secondly, supplying arms and weapons to the Pakistan Taliban and to the Lashkar-e-Jangvi, which is another terrorist organization. So you've got Blackwater Z working there, you've got Mossad working there, and all these use the term al-Qaeda attacks. Yeah? So basically, Israel is not affected because Israel's funding and supporting and organizing and sponsoring these groups, but not through their own money, because, you know, they're already soaking billions from the American taxpayers for their own country. No, they're taking Saudi money.
It has been claimed that the militants in Syria have provided intelligence to Israel, and in response, Israel has provided medical assistance to those same militants. If that's the case, what do the public feel about that relationship? Is what they said. It's claimed that militants fighting in Syria provide intelligence to Israel, and in turn Israel provides medical assistance to those militants. If this is indeed the case, what do you feel about that?
Again, it's another complicated issue, because the existence of Israel is a very almost a sticking point in the whole region, and yet everyone has their rights to their own opinion and their own course of action. I think the thing to consider is, if Israel is supporting militant or extremist behaviour, how does Western politics deal with that, considering the fact that Israel and particularly the US have very strong political relationship?
So, in fact, that al-Qaeda are providing information to Israel, it's a bit of a stretch in my mind, but I actually had never heard that. If that's the case, I think that's extremely odd. But in politics, politics makes strange bedfellows, isn't that the comment? So, I certainly wouldn't see it as a positive sign.
If that is indeed the case, I mean, I've not heard of this yet, but from what I've heard, they were meant to meet up with the Americans. The opposition forces were meant to meet up with the Americans. They refused because that would destroy the credibility as Islamists. So for them to be meeting Israel, I think that's highly unlikely. But if that is the case, that would be a betrayal of the Islamist agenda that is going around in Syria right now.
It has been claimed that militants fighting in Syria provide intelligence to Israel, and in turn, Israel has provided medical assistance to those militants. If this is indeed the case, how would you feel about that?
I'm not sure how I would feel about that. I mean, Israel has always played roles in the region, and you know, it's very difficult to. I don't know. You stop knowing the facts from the myths.
It wouldn't surprise me. I wouldn't be at all, I said, shocked if that was the case. Everyone seems to be in cahoots with each other and in going to bed with each other. I do sort of wonder where sort of east and west sometimes begins and ends. But yeah, it wouldn't shock me, I'm afraid. So.
Kind of hypocritical, I suppose, because if they're not really giving the medicine to Palestinians, which they kind of rightly deserve, and then they're allowing women who are pregnant to die of childbirth at the borders and not being allowed to go to hospitals, then I think it is a bit hypocritical to be kind of giving these kind of aid to foreign militants and Islamists. I think that would be completely wrong. Yeah.
So what are the implications of this apparent information sharing between militants and Israel? And of course the reciprocal medical support that they seem to be receiving. We turn to our experts for their very interesting insights.
As long as Syrians are fighting each other, they're not looking to Israel. So it's a tried and tested method that works incredibly well. And in a region where obviously religious tensions are high and where you can sort of work on those differences, etc., it's a very, very efficient way of dealing and weakening your opponent.
Of course, they are supplying intelligence to each other because these are the groups that have been sent by them. And also, why aren't they going to be there to look after the people that are sent into the war, right? They patch them up and send them back in there again. For them, that's just cannon fodder.
It is said that no al-Qaeda-related militants have attacked Israel. If that's the case, what do the public feel are the reasons? Here's what they said. Al-Qaeda militants are said to never have attacked Israel. Why would that be?
I think that they're being particularly careful. I mean, I'm not really sure, but I think that they're probably being careful with the whole Israel situation because people want to act like this isn't linked and that this isn't really about Israel, when really it is largely linked because Syria has been a presence of, you know, being against the state of Israel for a long time, and I feel like that by destabilizing Syria, then Israel becomes a large question because it becomes a lot more powerful in the region. So I'm not really sure about that, but I definitely think that the issue of Israel being related to the Syrian conflict is vital. Sure.
Probably because Israel is a far more powerful nation and could probably retaliate in a far stronger way than what al-Qaeda could dish out to them.
Militants who have been linked to al-Qaeda have apparently never attacked Israel.
Yeah.
Why is that? What do you think of that?
I mean, I think al-Qaeda is a mutation anyway of, you know, they're just fighting under the banner of Islam and so on and so forth, but they're attacking civilians. And they're not, I mean, if they were resistance movements, real, actual grassroots resistance movements, I think they wouldn't be targeting civilians.
So, cautious answers from the public. Can our experts clarify what on the face of it looks like a curious claim?
And the facts on the ground clearly show that al-Qaeda, despite talking and despite constantly speaking of targeting Israel, has never targeted Israel. So that's a fact. And we've seen that a lot of the militants in Syria have clearly appealed to Israeli help. And essentially, we remember Sheikh Ar'ur, who is a major figure, saying, you know, appealing to Israeli help, which is an absolute taboo, first in any Arab country, given the history, but in particular in Syria, given that Israel continues to occupy Syrian land, has had pain, you know, they've been at war for many years. So the fact that any Syrian could look to Israel for help really is breaking a taboo and crossing a red line that was absolutely unthinkable a few years ago. And I think in that red line, I mean, that red line has clearly shown that there is a connection and there are talks between the two parties.
I've been writing for a long time about the fact that there is a close alliance between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and the fact that in 2009 the Moshe Dayan think tank said that we have a close alliance with the Sunni states, Sunni Arab states, and they have been working very closely together. The agenda is same, and it's going to get worse. That's the sadness of it all, because what's going to happen is the fact that Israel's not going to give up.
And so we moved on to one more simple but very important question. We asked the public if they'd be surprised if the Israeli administration prepared the ground for a US-backed attack on Syria. Would you be surprised if Israel prepared the ground for a United States-backed attack on Syria?
No, I wouldn't be surprised.
Why not?
Because Israel and the US work closely together, and Israel is backed by the US.
No, probably not, because I think their involvement is probably more bigger than what it's painted out to be in the media. But I don't think it's only Israel who would be helping for that, I think.
I think I would be surprised if it was a high-profile course of action rather than a more clandestine operation. But it wouldn't surprise me if the US was involved in that, not at all, no.
Never. I would not be surprised, because I know Israel feels very strongly about protecting their own borders, and this would just be one instance of that, I could imagine.
Yes, I'd be very surprised.
Why would that be?
Because I don't think America really want to get that involved. And I think there's far more important things going on in the Ukraine at the moment, which is causing me more of a concern, to be honest with you. But no, I don't think America would get involved easily. As ever, we gave the last word to our experts, and we asked them how surprised they would be if Israel did prepare the ground for a US-backed attack on Syria.
At this point, I think I would be very surprised, although a lot of talk was about a Western or a NATO-led invasion or attack on Syria. For the best part of 3 years, that never happened, and it seems very, very unlikely to happen anytime soon, given that the mood and public opinion has completely changed in reference to the fact that a lot of al-Qaeda militants are clearly within Syria. It would have been feasible, sometimes, you know, hot off the heels of the Libya intervention, when public opinion was very much on board, when the sort of euphoria with the fall of Gaddafi would have given Western nations the impetus to go into Syria.
I won't be very surprised. It's going to happen one way or another. I don't think that Israel is going to give up, because they have to annihilate the axis of resistance, which is Syria, Iran, and Hezbollah. Okay, and so basically they've been trying to pressurize Congress. They have been trying to. They were the ones behind the Ghouta chemical attack, and the chemicals were traced back to Saudi Arabia, and the fact that Israel delivered it to the Takfiris.
Although it may seem confusing to the outside world, Israel appears to have found common cause with the militants fighting in Syria. It's a risky business. A relationship necessarily as volatile as it is unpredictable, and based on the assumption that my enemy's enemy is my friend. That principle is as shaky in the present as it is dangerous for the future.